everybody. Welcome to Rachel's Reviews. And today I'm very excited. I have with me a special member of the creative team of Across the Spider-Verse, which came out this last weekend. We have Mike Lasker here. He's the visual effects supervisor. And thank you so much, Mike, for coming on the podcast.
You're welcome. Pleasure to be here. I love talking about this film. I could talk for like 6 hours straight.
Yeah. Well, we'll only take 20 minutes of your time, but I think I could probably do the same. Congratulations on the film. I really enjoyed it. I was blown away by the animation. I mean, especially I feel like I need to see it many, many more times to even begin to sort of grasp everything that I saw.
Now that's awesome to hear. We spent so many years and every day on it was a hard project. Every day was like a week this project, and it was just very complex. Really fun work, very artistic. The crew had an amazing time. They were so incredible. And now that it's out after a few years of working on it, it's just surreal. Just
Yeah, that
having
must be so exciting to hear everybody's responses and to finally get to have it be released.
it's jarring. It's like you work this so long and you put trailers out here and there, but for them to see everything start to finish, it's just wild. It's
Yeah.
wild. So yeah, it's a great day.
Well, let's start by learning a little bit about you. And so, how did you get started working in animation?
Well, I was always an artist from when I was a little kid. I loved to draw. I always loved realism, and my high school was great. It had this art major, which was awesome. So like, I didn't have to keep taking math classes after like junior year. I got to focus on art, which was awesome. And then I went to a college that offered a computer graphics major. And because when I started to see movies like Jurassic Park, Terminator, and CG and computer animation, I loved it. I wanted to do it. I got obsessed with it.
Hmm.
So I went to college for it, and then when I got out, it was around 1998, and I just tried to do everything I could to get a job. I started from New York. I started off there. I worked in commercial effects for years, and finally, I was like, I want to get into movies, and I took a gamble, and I moved to Los Angeles and went to work for Sony Imageworks on Monster House. That was my first movie, and 18 years ago, and then kind of worked my way up from being a lighter to a lighting lead to a CG supervisor, and then to visual effects supervisor, where I was on Mitchell's First Machines, and then this film. And I worked on the first Spider-Verse, where I oversaw the look of picture team, looked at in textures, some lighting teams, really just helped figure out how that movie was going to look, and it really
Hmm.
helped segue into this one. Uh,
So, how did you get that first step in the door as far as working on Monster House? Working so because pretty much your whole career has been there, correct?
Yeah, my whole career in film. I mean, I worked for 8 or 9 years in New York City doing commercials, and that was very hard. At a school, it was like there was an explosion in the industry, and everyone was trying to get a job. I went to SIGGRAPH. I stood on job lines. It was very daunting, but finally, I was able to get an unpaid internship at this commercial effects house because the head of CG loved the software I was using. Alias Power Animator, Maya's predecessor. And so I kind of worked my way in there, and I worked for free for a while, then clawed my way into a paying position. And then after about 8 years in New York, Sony was looking for people. And I figured out that I liked animation more than like live action, because I did a lot of live action visual effects too. And they were looking for lighters to come work on Monster House. So I went out, I flew out, interviewed. I've been to Los Angeles maybe one time. So it was like a fish out of water, which is a weird and wild place. And then in the end, they hired me, and I went out. It was an amazing experience working on Monster House. It was such a
Hmm.
different movie to
Yeah.
start. That's why when artists whose first movie is Across the Spider Verse or Mitchell's or Into the Spider Verse, I'm saying this is a wild first project for you, because you almost never work on anything like one of these. And that was kind of like it for Monster House too.
Because Monster House was motion capture, right?
Yeah, it was motion capture for a lot of the performance. I think there was a lot of cleanup on that. It was also this very stop motion style
Hmm.
look. It was the first time we'd ever used the renderer that we ultimately ended up using, so it was very experimentative. The look, everything was really hard to do, but the movie's got this quality, I think, that no other film has, and it's kind of like a cult classic now. Every time I mention it,
Yeah.
people, oh my god, Monster House.
Yeah. Not
So
too shabby to be an Oscar nominated film, your first project.
yeah, it was cool. It was
Yeah.
cool.
That's cool.
Worked on Surf's Up a couple years after
Hmm.
that, which another film that it's kind of like a cult thing, but I always loved
Hmm.
that movie. And the
Yeah, that's
team
a
that
good
made
one.
that movie was a really good team. Now they kind of branched out across all the projects.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, I like that one too. Some of your roles. I was looking at your IMDb, and I'm just curious what some of these roles actually like end up entailing. Like, what is a technical director? What is that?
So at Sony, a technical director mainly referred to like a lighter. You come in, you primarily light shots and composite, especially with the animated
Hmm.
films. You have to handle the technical side of it too. So coming up as a generalist, I kind of knew all aspects of the pipeline. And as a technical director, you have to come in primarily light, but you need to be able to interact with the other departments and put your shots together. So it's kind of like a fancy way of just saying you're kind of a lighter compositor.
Hmm. Now, how does the lighting kind of work with these CG films? Do they give you the animated sequence? The animators give you the animated sequences, and then you just decide kind of, okay, what colors of lighting,
Mhm.
what strength of lighting, what do we?
Yeah, so typically the way it works is you have your whole pipeline. Once you get out of development and shot start, they start with rough layout, which is like the blocking of the shots. As soon as rough layout starts, because lighting wants to get ahead of things as soon as they can. As soon as rough layout has the sequence in a good enough place where the cameras are more or less going to be what they're going to be, we send all of those shots to visual development, and we work with them. We pick out key shots for the sequences, the shots that are the most indicative of how the lighting would be. And then they'll paint over and they'll give us lighting keys. And that's basically visual guidance for what the art directors, the directors want the lighting to be. And then we'll go through a process called key lighting, where we'll set up our light rigs and we'll match the lighting keys they've given to us. While we're doing that, rough layout is moved into animation. The animators are working. Shots sometimes change. The performances are being infused into it. And then once we're done with key lighting, typically animation is done. And then they move it into the back end of the pipeline, which is effects, CFX, which is hair and cloth, matte painting, and then lighting. And we've got guidance for how the lighting should be. Depending on the sequence, we can sort of render out a whole sequence with one lighting rig to see how it's going to track. On Spider-Verse movies, not as easy to do that. You look at sequences like in Gwen's world, where every shot is a different painting with different colors. So one thing that made these films a lot more tricky is you couldn't rely on tried and true things that you've done before. Um,
Mhm.
those are really the basics. The visual development, Sony Animation work with us to show us how they want the film to look, and we take that as our guidance.
Mhm. Now, I'm curious, how communal is the sort of story writing and development process? Is that kind of already done by the time it gets to you? Or if you see something you think, I think about this particular part of the story,
Right.
how does that all work?
So a lot of times it depends on who your filmmakers are. And with Chris and Phil, the filmmakers on Spider Verse movies, they are working it and reworking it and reworking it all throughout the process. So very rarely is the story completely locked down as we start. As they're working, they're recording new dialogue with the actors, so that affects what animation is doing. Typically by the time lighting is starting, things are more or less locked down, but you a lot of times get new shots or new sequences because they keep reworking it. I think that's why their movies are so good. It's that they try to hone it and make it the best it can be, and not try to be locked down or locked into sort of production needs as much. They just want to kind of make it the best. So they work outside the box a little bit. So
Mm,
it definitely makes it can be more challenging, but in the end, it pays off because the work's the best it can be.
mhm. So you have done some live action work. How's that when you're working on Edge of Tomorrow or something like that?
I got into the business doing live action. All like most of the commercials I did were live action. Then I did a bunch of live action films at Sony. I really love it. I had a love for it when I was younger. What I love about animation is that you have a little more creative freedom since you're creating everything on screen. You
Yeah.
know, it's like everything is created from the ground up. You're not relying on plates. You're not having to pull green screen pulls. And I just find it to be creative in a different way. I used to love making photoreal effects, making things look like they're really there, lighting characters into environments like they're really there, casting shadows. but I really responded to animated stuff because it's just like you can create worlds and you can do things with animation you can't do in live action. And that's why I think the Spider-Verse movies are so cool because you get like you can do things with these heroes, these spider characters that you just can't do. And there's a lot more freedom creatively.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
I definitely still have a love for live action. That's why in this movie we had the opportunity to do some of that. And it was kind of fun to
Yeah.
get back to that. So,
Yeah, I have so many things I could talk to you about because I thought that Smurfs: The Lost Village was very underrated. I really enjoyed that film, especially the world building, the anything on the river. I thought was just so beautiful, and
mhm.
I think because there was a mixed response to the live action Smurfs, I think people didn't give this animated one the shot that I think it deserved. So
Yeah, it was.
I really enjoyed it. I thought it had such big heart and
I loved Smurfs: The Lost Village. I worked
yeah.
on one of the live action ones too, and we worked with Kelly Asbury on Smurfs: The Lost Village. He was amazing to work with, and
Mhm.
we wanted to create this very storybook, miniature, lush world.
Yeah.
And I think it appealed to younger kids. I think maybe the story didn't offer enough for adults, which might have hurt it. But I thought I loved how I was just watching. It was on TV the other day. I put it on. I was just watching it. I'm like, wow, this still looks really good. I had a
Mhm.
great team on the Sony Animation side, great production designer, and I just love the forests. I love the Lost
Mhm.
Village side of the wall with all the bioluminescent plants. And the first sequence we did in that movie
Mm.
was the rabbit chase through all the tunnels and
Oh, really? I love that
the
sequence.
glow in the dark rabbits. And I loved creating that all of those intricate, rocky underground environments down
Mhm.
there. But yeah, I have a warm place in my heart for that film.
Yeah, and then The Mitchells vs. the Machines, which was my favorite movie of that year. I love the family. I love the characters. I got to interview Mike for that movie, and I I just thought that that movie had so much heart, and I don't know anybody that couldn't relate to this
Uh,
family dynamic.
you
Especially,
know,
I
yeah,
really loved the brother and Katie. Yeah,
yeah. Now
so
I loved that film and I love that crew. Mike Rienda was sitting behind me in the premiere. Him and Jeff were there. Jeff's directing Ninja Turtles now. It's a
ugh,
great, great crew. Um, Lindsay, the production designer, Toby, the art director. It was like a family. Kurt, the producer, and it came through in the work. And it was Mike was that movie. That was his story. Rick was his father. I got to
yeah.
see Rick's real coat in person. I was there when Mike's mom met Maya Rudolph at the Oscars. It was a magical moment. The mom meeting the mom. And coming off of Spider Verse, it was a gift to be able to do another movie with a new look. They kind of could feed the creativity into something else, and it was just fantastic. I loved working on that film, and I just loved how well it was received. Katie, the Katie vision, basically everything about it.
Are you a fan of Rachel's reviews? Do you look forward to Family Movie Night, Female Film Critics panels, or the Talking Disney podcast? If so, please consider supporting the podcast by becoming a Patreon. As a patron, you get to access monthly events such as the watch-alongs and Q&As, where you get to talk to stars and find out the behind the scenes of the movie making industry. And you can pick what I review for Family Movie Night or even become a guest on the podcast. Podcasts and YouTube channels are expensive, and I really, really could use your help. I would so appreciate it. You also get to be a member of the Facebook group where we talk about all the films that we're seeing, and we have so much fun. Go to patreon.com/hallmarkies and select one of the Rachel's fan tiers. That's patreon.com/hallmarkies.
It was
I
so
wish
much.
that they would re-release or give it a release. I think it would do well. I don't know.
Me
But
too.
I
Good.
do. I think people, at least like a Fathom event or something. It would be so fun. I got
I
to see it at Animation's film, but most people haven't.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you know what was interesting? I never worked on a movie that it came out on streaming before. It didn't go in the theater.
Yeah.
What was wild was the day it came out, everyone I knew saw it. It was amazing. It was like instantly everyone saw it. And I love the theaters and that it was just a different experience. And I was like, oh my God, that was that was wild.
Yeah.
But it would be nice for it to come out in the theaters and that would be great.
Well, it was the perfect timing too for that movie because we had all been so isolated. So something that was making a commentary about
Yeah.
that social media and that apps and all of that was felt all the and our estrangement from family members and all those different things that we'd been experiencing for 2 years, it all rang really true, I think.
Yeah, and we, the pandemic happened right in the middle of that production, and we
Yeah.
all had to go remote, and it took the company 2 to 3 days to get hundreds and hundreds of artists their own setups at home. It was unbelievable. We barely skipped a beat, and it was just I couldn't get over like how good a job they did getting everyone home and set up. I never
Mhm.
thought I could work at home, and now I've got this home set up, and it's just made working extra hours and weekends way easier to be able to do that. I go into the office every day now, especially on the Spider-Verse movie. But
Mhm.
yeah, it was we did half that movie at home, and I filed it all at home. It was wild, and my daughter got to hear me working through the wall, and I gave her a window into what I do, which was a lot of fun.
That's so cool. So with the Spider-Verse into the Spider-Man into the Spider-Verse, was was there a sense around the studio that this was a special project, that this was going to be
Mm.
something
You know,
important?
it's funny. The first one started very quietly, and I got my choice of projects to go on to, and I was sitting with my artist manager, and he mentioned this and he mentioned that, and I was like, "What about that animated Spider-Man movie?" He's like, "Oh yeah, okay." It was kind of like no one really knew what it was going to be, because nothing like that had really been done.
Yeah.
And it was just as soon as I got into it, I was like, "Oh my god, this is going to be amazing." It just, but it was very experimentative. We constantly had to sit around and I worked with Brett St. Clair and Pav and all the same team as in across the Spider-Verse. We'd sit around saying, "How are we going to figure this out?" Working with the dev team, because it was so different, and we had no idea what people would even think of it.
Mhm.
Uh, and but Chris and Phil, you got to hand it to them and the director. They took a gamble, and the studio was behind it. The studio took a gamble. Like Josh Beveridge, who was the animation supervisor on the first one, we walked down the hall. We'd be like, "Are they letting us make this movie? Like they're letting us do this? It's such a wild chance they're taking."
Yeah. Well, it's especially amazing when you think of they had just had the embarrassment of the Emoji Movie, that was nobody, almost hardly anybody liked. And so
Yeah.
then to jump off of that and make an Academy Award winning groundbreaking film is
Mhm.
just really cool.
I got to hand it to Christine Belson, the president of Sony Animation. She has just been amazing, and I think she's really guided that studio in the right direction. So
Mhm.
many cool projects now. They seem to be making all the right choices, and they really put everything behind these movies. And you need to. They're so artistic and creative. They need to be done in a good environment. You're not going to get the art, and it's the same for like my crew. So I always tell them when they come on, if you have a good idea, if you have a cool idea, let's see it because it'll end up on the screen. It happened in the first movie. So that's why one of the reasons these movies are so intricate and great is because you have 1,000 artists doing what they do best, being creative, coming up with things, and if they work, they work.
Yeah.
There's rules, but barely any. So, you know,
Yeah. So the leap sequence, I think, is especially memorable. So what was that like, creating the visual effects and the animation and everything for the initial leap sequence
yeah. So
in that
that
movie?
sequence originally was in the very first teaser for Into the Spider Verse, and I
Mhm.
supervised, and it was the first thing we put out there. And then those shots later went into the movie. We made some adjustments on them, but that's where they were born. I'll never
Well,
forget the first.
I went to see it I went to see Venom so that I could see the first 20
Oh,
minutes of Spider-Verse.
yeah. I mean, it was something. And those shots, I'll never forget, like the first shots we finaled, where we're figuring out how to put, half tones into glows and how to do our building interiors and, all the city below and how we were going to depth of field and offsetting and chromatic aberration, and had a great team that did that. And I'll just never forget the day when it came out and people just went nuts for it. I mean, there were some people that didn't understand the frame rates, didn't understand kind of our style of depth of field. It took a while when you do something that different. I feel
Mhm.
like a lot of people, so it can be jarring visually. Uh,
Mhm.
but it was a really amazing sequence to work on. We had great shots of like Miles standing next to the subway as the subway goes by,
Ugh.
cast all that graphic light on him, and all the scenes of Miles perched on that building. We had to figure out how to simplify the buildings, how to get it into the style. I mean, that was the first sequence we really lit. That and the cemetery sequence in the first. That was the first movie sequence that went into production. So they were both kind of going on at the same time. And in that teaser, there's one or two cemetery shots that made it in when you see Miles turn around with his mask and his hood on in the cemetery because he sees
Mhm.
Peter moving in the distance. But it was amazing, and it was like the start of something really
Yeah.
great.
Well, it must be really gratifying to see so many films now in the 5 years since that have taken inspiration from Spider-Verse and things like Puss in Boots, The Last Wish, things like that, that the action and the other animation style that they have added to it and
I love it.
yeah, it's really cool.
It's so great to see, and it's so great to have been part of a project that helped push things that way. But
Yeah.
I love seeing mixed media, mixed looks, different looks. For so many years, you'd have beautiful animated films, but and I worked on Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, Hotel Transylvania, a bunch of them, and you'd kind of rely on this similar rule set. And what made Into the Spider Verse so hard was that you threw that all out and you had to rebuild everything up, and you had to get your brain to kind of get used to coming up with new solutions and figuring out challenges every day for everything.
Yeah.
It's kind of scary. But now it's great to see these
Hmm.
other doing that. I mean, Ninja Turtles is another one coming.
Oh, I can't wait.
Very excited to see that.
Yeah.
He's amazing. I was just talking about it. I'm really happy. Like, the new trailer looks great.
Yeah. So with Across the Spider-Verse, one of the things that really blew my mind is you have so many different spider characters, and each one has their own visual style to it. And sometimes within the same frame, you have multiple characters, each with their own animation style, with the background also having a unique visual style. How did you do it?
It's interesting. So on the first film, we followed a path where every character is actually rendered and lives in the environment. Spider Ham, Spider Noir, they're all
Hmm.
really there, and then we create their look. And we follow the same way on this film, where everyone is lit under the same lights in the scene, so they all feel like they're there. But then we get into them and we apply their looks and their treatment. So for characters like the Vulture and for Punk, we really wanted them to stand out, but you needed a little bit of integration. So if you watch a Vulture in the Guggenheim, he picks up a little of the environment bounce light and color. For Punk, he always picks up a little bit of the lighting, so they feel like they're there, but you want them to stand out at the same time. But I mean, every character in the film was like its own project. I mean, Spider Bite, layers of effects, holographic treatments, motion graphics. Gwen and Gwen's World, so painterly. She had her own look. Miguel O'Hara, 2099, he had his own 2099 Sid Mead inspired John Berkey look that he would bring with him. So, and you can just go on and on. Jessica Drew had her own artistic look. I mean, everybody. So it just contributed to the nothing being easy fact of the film. Everything
Yeah.
was, and then yeah, they all have to live together in the same frame and all you know fit in somehow, but also stand out. So it was
Yeah.
a very delicate balance.
My mouth was agape. Just what I couldn't believe what I was watching as far as the animation. Unbelievable. And it is a long film, and it's of course they decided to split it into two parts. Originally it was just going to be the one part. What was that process like in deciding, and did they feel like it was going to be a risk, like making, I think it's the longest mainstream
It,
animated film ever made, if I'm not mistaken.
it
And
is.
and so that's really, it was an interesting choice they made.
Yeah, I mean, the idea for it being two films was made early on. But I think, where one ends or the other begins was always sort of in question. And, Phil
Hmm.
wanted to make the movie he wanted to make, and his story he wanted to tell ended up being that long. And, I think him and the filmmakers, they wanted to make the most out of those emotional scenes. They wanted to really get the emotional beats and the story beats they wanted. And I think it moves pretty quickly. I feel like you get out of it and you don't feel like it's been that long. But
Yeah.
we had to do 3,000 shots in
Oh
this.
my
Like,
gosh.
3,000 is most we've ever done, and they're all extremely complicated.
Yeah.
Uh, So it was wild, and we worked up until the end. I mean, there was no time to spare when this was over. But yeah, it ended up being that's what it ended up being. And as far as how long the next one will be, I don't know yet. So,
Uh, well, so you have all of these Spider-Man characters. Was it hard to decide which characters to use when?
well, I think by what the story guided us in animation. I mean, that was where it was figured out. We built a lot of characters for this movie. We had 600 characters with rigs. We had about 150 spider people that then could expand into the hundreds based on variations. We built a whole new crowd system. So our crowds looked way more complex and more like real characters and people. We built 50 villains that were in cages that were actually for a sequence that ended up not being in the movie, but we just have all of these really cool characters you'll see as you go through all those cages. Um, and yeah, just lots of characters, and the story, was able to sort of tell the tale the best way it could. But what's cool is they're all done to a level where everyone really has a lot of sophistication. So everywhere you look, you're going to see a pretty fleshed out character.
Yeah. So how did they decide of having the Spot be the villain?
I mean, as far as how they decided to it, I'm not sure. Like, you'd have to ask them. But I think the character was great. He started
Mhm.
off as kind of almost like a joke villain.
Yeah.
He doesn't even take himself seriously, and then we progress his look until where he gets to what he's going to be, and where he's extremely scary. And
Yeah.
honestly, those shots of him, they were so complex, and I just love how he came out because I've never seen a villain go from not scary to just horrifying in a very short period of time. And I just love how he came out. But there was a lot that went
Mhm.
with him. He was sort of like the lack of color in the frame. We made him look very sketchy and hand drawn. And then he's got these spots that are made of ink, and they progress and they get crazier and more complex as he finds his power.
Mhm.
And they kind of help tell his story to a degree.
As a team, was it intimidating to kind of follow up to this incredible film of Into the Spider-Verse? That must have been a lot of pressure.
It definitely was, and that's what I thought right before I came on. I was gonna like, wow, they're gonna have to, top the next one. I mean, I think it's impossible to not think that. But I think for the team, it was a lot of the same core people as the first one. Everyone shared that sense of creativity and welcoming challenges, and having done that first one and then a movie or two in between, everyone was kind of into that. So as where the first one, it was a new thing. This we all kind of knew what we were getting into and came in ready to do it and to meet those challenges. And they were big challenges. I mean, spending huge amounts of film time in these other worlds, they all had to hold up and be like next level complex and sophisticated. So they all had to really be robust. So we had to build so many new tools and just teach it to tons of artists. And it was amazing. That's why we had 1,000 people. It was so complex. We needed more people to do everything that we typically
Yeah.
would.
That's so cool. Well, congratulations. I really enjoyed the film, and thank you so much for coming and talk with me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot. It was a pleasure.
I'd like to thank Mike for coming on the podcast. This was so much fun to get to talk to him. And I hope you all enjoyed seeing the movie this weekend or get to see it this week because I think it's a tremendous film. And let me know what you think of all the two things we talked about in the comment section or on Twitter. And if you are listening on iTunes, please leave your ratings and reviews. I really, really appreciate that. And if you are watching on YouTube, please give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Appreciate that so much. And check out the Patreon group and merch store. You can get hashtag Animation Junkie shirts at the merch store. And thanks again to Mike. This was a real treat for me. So thanks so much. We'll talk to you later. Bye.